The Cutie Mark Crusaders are underrated. They are central characters in Friendship is Magic. In terms of screen time and the number of episodes that feature them, they are probably the most prominent characters in the show after the main six. Maybe an argument could be made for Spike, but he tends to be tacked on to the main six episodes and only has a claw full of episodes that actually feature him. Starlight doesn't even come close. I think a lot of fans forget just how many CMC episodes there are. And it's not like they're underwhelming characters. All that screen time came with some solid character development, but the fandom seems a little uninterested in them. I don't see nearly as much fan art, fan fiction, and love for the CMCs as their crucial role in the show would merit. So I'm going to talk about the CMCs, their role in the show, and how that role evolved over time. Friendship is Magic is a kids' show that was also intended to be watchable for parents. Since the main characters were adults, it makes sense that Lauren Faust would add some folds to the cast to explore kid-specific issues like finding out who you want to be in life and dealing with school bullies. They also worked as a way to explore the unique concept of cutie marks, and throughout the show's run, they would approach the potential complications of special butt stamps from a lot of different angles, which very much enriched the show's world building. Given those two rather important roles, relatability for the core audience and expanding the lore, it's no surprise that the CMCs got a lot of episodes. I will admit, in Season 1, I was kind of like, can we move on now, when the CMC episodes came up? The CMCs grow up through the course of the series. In Season 1, they act very young. If I were to put an age on them, I'd say like 8. And they act 8. And I guess that's not necessarily bad, but I prefer them when they've matured a little bit and have a more nuanced but still childish outlook on the world. Season 1 also doesn't delve deeply into the CMCs as individual characters, treating them more as a group except their leader, Apple Bloom. And at this point, her most prominent character trait is just that she wants a cutie mark, so she's not exactly unique in this regard. Season 1 also doesn't really explore the relationships between the CMCs and their older sisters or sister figures, so yeah, a lot of the complexity just isn't there yet. However, Season 1 does establish the base plot for most CMC episodes, which is that they try something crazy to get their cutie marks and shenanigans ensue. But I think the most entertaining shenanigans will come in later seasons. Season 2 is where the CMCs won my heart. This is where the writers start exploring these characters individually rather than just as a group. They start to add a lot of nuance and complexities, and this is also where the writers start exploring the CMC's other relationships besides just each other and Diamond Tiara. And I think this is something worth talking about. It's really interesting to see the contrast between their family situations. Apple Bloom adores Applejack, while Sweetie Belle and Rarity have a lot of friction. However, it's refreshing to see that despite their friction, Sweetie Belle and Rarity really do care for each other. Both of them take steps to bridge the gap between them, even if it's after burning a bridge. Apple Bloom and AJ almost always get along, except where AJ is being overprotective. But Apple Bloom has to work to build up her relationship with Granny Smith and Big Mac. One thing I really appreciate about her journey through the show is that we get to see some payoff in that regard, with those relationships being depicted more strongly after the episodes that develop them. And then Scootaloo just doesn't have a family until Season 9. But her relationship with Rainbow Dash is certainly worth discussing. She idolizes Dashie, so it's a potentially unequal relationship. But Dashie is almost always respectful to Scootaloo and recognizes her awesomeness. This is important because Dashie was born with supportive parents and functional wings, and Scootaloo was not. When tension does develop between them, it usually stems from those differences. One other thing that gets developed in seasons 2 through 5 is that as they become more mature, the ways in which they are not mature come into clearer focus. Namely, they are chaos machines. All three of them are capable of coming up with crazy schemes that any sane pony would know will end poorly. And this isn't just an age thing, because sometimes these plans are really elaborate. To use a couple of Season 2 examples, if you're capable of successfully brewing a love poison or writing a popular anonymous gossip column, you should be old enough to know these are things you shouldn't do. The CMCs are like a loose cannon, and I love them for it. This happened in the comics, but I really wish they had an episode with Discord, because the chaos levels would have been off the charts. The culmination of the CMC's arc also feels like a high point for the entire show, and is one of the most beloved episodes. I'm not going to do a whole review of Crusaders of the Lost Mark here, but suffice it to say that I find it suitably climactic and emotional. It's the first MLP episode that made me cry. In terms of the CMC's overall role in the story, obviously the change here is that they get their cutie marks, so I want to talk about those for a moment. The Crusader shield on each of their marks caught some fans off guard, I think, but honestly, it makes sense. In Season 1, you have an idea of what each of their destinies is going to be, but that morphs over time. For example, Sweetie Belle is more than just singing. The CMCs were already late bloomers in Season 1, and presumably several more years pass before they get their cutie marks in Season 5. The way I interpret it, they spent so much of their childhoods trying to get their cutie marks that it's kind of a part of who they are. Sure, they could have learned the lesson that Twilight was trying to teach them in the Showstoppers, and they may have gotten their cutie marks right then and there, but instead they went the long way round and arrived at something better. The quest for their cutie marks was the defining event of their childhood, so it makes sense that their marks are related to that and therefore intertwined with each other. They each have their own interests and talents, of course, but Cutie Mark Counselor is a market niche that, if not already filled, certainly could be filled based on what we see in the show. So, I like their marks. Another thing that happens because of Crusaders of the Lost Mark is that their role in the show has to be somewhat redefined, because previously the standard CMC episode involved them trying some crazy scheme to get their cutie marks. So let's talk about how the show handled it. I've seen some fans say that the CMCs shouldn't have gotten their marks until the show's end, but I don't think their journey was complete until we saw what they did with their marks. Without seeing the ins and outs of their Cutie Mark counseling gig and how they balanced that with their other interests, we really wouldn't have much of an idea of what the rest of their lives would look like. I'll get this out of the way now. Diamond Tiara dropped off the face of Equestria. That was the wrong thing to do, considering how prominent she was in the CMC's lives before Season 5 and how pivotal she was in their key episode, Crusaders of the Lost Mark. She and Silver Spoon absolutely should have been recurring characters throughout the later seasons. Yes, their role is a little more difficult to define without the bully archetype, but the comics were able to make it work, and it wasn't even one of those cringy comics that feels like a fanfic. Spirit of the Forest is one of the best comics, and it absolutely should have been an episode. Other than that, I think Seasons 6 and 7 were going the right direction in terms of continuing the CMC's stories after they get their marks. One thing I particularly enjoy about these seasons is that we can see how much the CMCs have matured since the beginning. This is where we have stories like Rarity struggling to connect with Sweetie Belle because of how much she's grown up and changed, the CMCs running a summer camp, and Apple Bloom having preteen angst. Like most things in G4, the CMCs were at their best between Seasons 2 and 7, and hit their peak in Season 5. After that, things deteriorate. There are still CMC episodes that I like at this stage. Surf and or Turf and The Last Crusade are a couple of examples. However, Seasons 8 and 9 significantly dial back their importance in the show. As I covered in the beginning, the CMCs are probably the most important characters in G4 after the main 6, and Seasons 8 and 9 just don't treat them that way. Season 8 gives us a child villain, and you'd think the CMCs would be the perfect rivals for her. But in the finale, they walk themselves into a closet, knowing she's hostile, and just let her close the door on them. That was the extent of their contribution. Now, none of the other seasons made a habit of featuring the CMCs in the premieres and finales, but Season 8 with Cozy Glow felt like the time to start, especially since the writers were interested in shifting the focus away from the main 6 and onto a younger group of successors. Obviously, that was the Student 6, but introducing 6 new characters out of the blue was not really the right call so late in a show that was already suffering from cast bloat. Notably, the Student 6 were, for the most part, never developed as individual characters, only as a group, whereas the CMCs very much had individual development and character depth. I'd make the argument that one thing that would seriously help Season 8 would be to replace the Student 6 with the CMCs. They were much more natural successors to the main 6, especially since they already had the groundwork of character development and wouldn't need to be introduced out of the blue. To round out the School of Friendship cast, the writers could have included Diamond Tiara and Silver Spoon in their group as well, and if they're insistent on having 6, they could have thrown Babseed or Gabby in there. Or both, why not? One response I've gotten when bringing up this kind of rewrite in discussions is that the group has too many Earth ponies or too few non-ponies. But let's be real here. The ponies bring friendship to other species thing probably sounded better in the writers' heads. On screen, it plays out as kind of colonialist. As for the Earth pony thing, you know what? There is so much emphasis on the unicorns and alicorns in this show. Why can't we have a crew of mostly Earth ponies? So yeah, I think replacing the Student 6 with the CMCs would have improved Season 8 significantly. Season 9 backpedals on some of Season 8's mistakes, like for example, making the main 6 the main characters again, but the CMCs continue to be overshadowed. Growing Up is Hard to Do would have been a good CMC episode in like Season 4. They're not adults, but they have grown up in a lot of ways. They've done things like run a summer camp, travel to Mount Eris, counsel adults with identity crises. I'm pretty sure they can take a train. And I'll slip this in here. The one thing that disappointed me was the decision not to age up their character designs at all throughout the course of the show. By my reckoning, they were probably about 8 years old at the start of the show and at least 13 by season 9. That is a huge difference, and you can certainly sense the difference in terms of the way they behave and even their voices. And it is weird that they still look like tiny little foals. But the worst culprit in season 9 is the finale. I thought the CMCs deserved to be in the rainbow laser at the end, but instead they hardly even make an appearance. The writers came up with nameless background characters to give friendship speeches to the unicorns and Pegasi when Sweetie Belle was right there and Scootaloo was nowhere to be seen. Their absence in this finale that brings so many characters from the show's whole run together is conspicuous. I mean, at least they featured in the show's last Slice of Life episode, The Big Mac Question, and they are depicted as working at the School of Friendship in the epilogue, which feels like the right place for them given their Cutie Mark counseling role. So they weren't completely ignored, but overall I feel like the CMCs deserved a much more prominent role in the last 2 seasons than what they got. So I guess this was a long-winded way of saying that the CMC's role evolved through the course of the show. They grew a lot as characters, and their contribution to the show as a whole was substantial and often overlooked. Their episodes often provide more grounded slice-of-life conflicts in contrast to the adventures that the main 6 go on. Now, I would like to talk about them individually, about their character development and their personalities. They are an inseparable trio, but unlike the Student 6, they are each a complete character on their own. Unfortunately, this is already a long video, so I will have to make it a 2-parter. I will make another video where I talk about the CMCs individually. Until then, peace out.